They said it couldn't last.
Written and read by Mike Hayes.
Their meeting was anything but the norm. Not for them the usual hormone-driven breakout of early teenage. Far from it. Alan met Sandra at St. Winifred's when he was just past 2 years old, and she just doubled that. Lest you be deceived, St. Winifred's was not a posh starter school for kids of deep-pocketed parents. St. Winifred's was a repository, hospice, school for children not born proper or with some disability. Alan Davenport was blind. Sandra Barnes was deaf and dumb. Sandra's deafness was attributed to an attack of German measles, followed immediately by scarlet fever. Those who knew about such things said because she could not hear or mimic sounds, she wouldn't develop the power of speech. Alan's blindness was attributed to him contracting trachoma while with his parents, who were government officials in a Middle Eastern dependency. As seems normal, typical, year for year, Miss Barnes had more than double the boy's confidence, awareness, and social skills. As much as her condition would allow, she was outgoing. He was withdrawn, hesitant, and more than a little wary of all. With little effort on her part, just his willingness, he had become one of Sandra's main followers. Already, at just 7, 8 years old, she was ready to big sister, mother, care for this shy, hesitant lad who had no one. In fact, she became his eyes. But there were problems. He couldn't see her. She couldn't hear or speak to him. No one any longer sniggered when they were seen holding hands when walking. No one thought it strange when she would touch his face, head, arms, hands. It meant something to both. The senior, more experienced staff were wary of their closeness. Yes, they said, but wait what happens when they're separated. Which, in 1941, is precisely what happened. In relation to the German bomber planes, St. Winifred's was in so-called Bomb Alley. The decision to evacuate the children's part of the national plan. Girls to a former stately home in Somerset, boys to a former public school. The facilities are simple but appropriate. The organization was exemplary. By mid-morning on departure day, all of Homo sapiens had departed. St. Winifred's left to the mercy of mice and the bomb aimers' inaccuracy. Unquestionably, the girls had the better deal. The facilities indoors almost matched the spacious gardens. Many professed to not missing the boys, but not Sandra. He was special in a way she didn't yet fully understand. Conditions for the boys were, to say the least, Spartan. The all-male staff did their best to educate these young boys, but classrooms were no match for the hills, quarries, and lakes of North Wales. Alan Davenport was one of 4 blind lads resident there for whom special provision had been made, a specialist teacher for the blind. On his first visit, he asked, "Boys, what experience of Braille have you?" Alan was the only one to say, "None." "Oh, well, I know where to start with you," was a resigned answer. But Master Davenport fared better in the hearing test, to which his teacher remarked, "Good, may be able to do something with you, boyo," which he did. By summer 53, Alan D had passed all the tests and exams to be a qualified piano tuner. On the premise, there are more pianos in London than in Bala, he moved back to London. Miss Barnes had not been idle. She had so fine-honed her signing skills, she was being paid for her services. Primarily infant and junior schools, occasionally a secondary school, and joy of joy, weekly sessions in 3 different hospitals. But this particular day, she was upset. She'd been denied use of the school hall. With a mix of lip reading and signing, she complained. The head was unmoved. Well, sorry, not today. Mr. Davenport is coming to tune our piano. And do you know he's blind? Miss Barnes's frustration took a break. The name? Can't be many of those. And blind? It can't be. She wasn't conscious she'd made a detour via the hall back to the ladies' staff room, but took in the youngish man seated, the piano's end trays laid bare, tweaking metal knobs and listening. Some people say blind folk have a sixth sense, a compensation. He was aware of another person, turned ever so slightly on his chair and said quietly, "Good morning to you." She easily lip-read the greeting, but her signed reply just vanished into the ether. In the staff room, signing and lip-reading, she inquired of the head what she knew about him. Nothing much. He's good, turns up on time, always leaves his card. Miss Barnes's eyes widened. Can I see? Have this one. One glance of the card and she was convinced. Alan Davenport, blind. 3 out of 3. It's got to be him. It took 2 weeks for her to arrange for a teacher friend to arrange a visit to the address on the card. She, Sandra, had compiled a letter to him in terms that could be read by a third party, her friend, of course. No one was to be embarrassed. The piano tutor's partially sighted flatmate had arranged to be out, but had left the kettle, teapot, milk, sugar, and some biscuits in an order that he knew Alan could manage. It would not be his first tea and biscuits for visitors. Fine if everything was in place, and they were patient. Mr. Davenport was expecting work queries. Many household pianos needed more than just tuning. He always tried to oblige. He answered the door as promptly as he could. The voices, aroma, suggested females, at least 2. Sandra's heart rate belied their calm, silent entry. Her friend, party to Sandra's innermost thoughts, was also wary, a go-between, a catalyst, a mediator. She'd not done it before. Alan ran his hand against the wall to get to the sitting room, was relieved they refused his offer of tea. How may I help? I'm Joan, Sandra's friend. She believes you are someone she knew a long time ago, before the war even. Do you recall someone called Sandra, a place called St. Winifred's? I remember the girl. They said she was a deaf mute. Such a harsh term. You don't hear it now. She was my eyes. Do you have news of her? She's sitting next to me, written a letter for me to read. Even with sightless eyes, a face can change expression. You mean she's with you? The other person? I knew there were 2. Let me shake her hand. She read the letter as best she could. Wonderful to have survived in these dreadful times and make something of oneself is marvelous. Helping others is good, so good. Do you live near? Not too far away. The evening meeting was just the first of many. Less than 6 months to the date of that meeting, Miss Barnes moved in. The neighbours, with a nod and a wink-wink, agreed she was his carer. Before the month's rent was due, the couple were planning a wedding, theirs. Their courtship, they last, went back several years, but it was lost on most. For both, it was a time of discovery, working things out. They did the best they could. The wedding, a very simple affair, but the future Mrs. Davenport insisted on a church wedding. Anywhere that'll have us. 2 guests each. Joan was one to give the responses, and the other the head teacher of the school. On the groom side was his former flatmate as best man and guide, of course, and his wife. No honeymoon, back to work on Monday. Despite their individual failings, life together was better than the sum of two. A pattern of behavior evolved, and if both stuck to it, there were no major upsets. Alan knew something was up. An unusually excited wife had brought a friend home. He guessed it would be Joan, faithful Joan. She was the one blessed, could see, could talk, could hear, and do signing. He heard the rustle of paper. Sandra has been invited to join a trial about new things for deaf people. A cochlear implant, whatever that is. Nothing to pay, weekend in hospital, regular checkups afterwards. She wants to say yes. You must be willing too. He was aware of Sandra's closeness, subtle change of air, her smell after a day's work, her breath. She turned to Joan and signed, "It cannot make me worse." Friend did not need the prompt, just relayed the message to Alan. The surgery went ahead. The 3-month follow-up negotiated well enough, and Sandra Davenport was no longer deaf, just hard of hearing. It would be wrong to claim her speech returned overnight, because it didn't. But she was improving, making sounds, verbal sounds, sufficient to inform her husband she wanted to get married again. He was totally confused. Joan explained, renewing her vows. Alan was not involved in any of the planning, but on a balmy day in September, he found himself with 4 others, his wife, Joan, ex-flatmate, and his wife, before a minister of the cloth in a church. In due course, the enrobed man intoned, "Do you, Sandra Davenport nee Barnes, take this man?" Almost before he'd finished the question, a sound, a voice from the back of her throat managed an "I do." As she said it, a tear rolled down her cheek.